Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and salam sejahtera. Good afternoon, all distinguished guests. Welcome to webinar session of the Higher Education Virtual Expo 2021. With me here is Mr. Alex Cook, Head of Sixth Form, Dean of Higher Education and Career from Jordan International School. He will be presenting on a topic called How to Write a Personal Statement. So before we start, there will be a 10-minute session for a question and answer at the end of the session. So you can all the attendees, you can type your questions at the chat area, and we will try our best to answer all your questions. So you may start now, Mr. Alex.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my presentation now. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about how to write your personal statement, and this is aimed mainly at those wishing to apply to the UK via UCAS, but actually it's applicable to pretty much any university system where you might want to write about yourself. So it could be application essays for United States or Canada as well. So I've chosen this image because I've been doing this for about 15 years, helping students to go to university. And at around about this time, it's a really confusing and difficult picture because there are so many different paths that you can follow. Now, the personal statement is a really important part of deciding what it is that you want to do. So a lot of people, they think the personal statement is sort of, it stands alone, but it doesn't. It's a really important part of this process because it forces you to really examine the reasons why you want to do a certain course. And in actual fact, we ask all of our students to write a personal statement, regardless of whether they need one, because it's a hugely important life skill and it helps you to really choose the course that's correct for you. Now, a lot of people get fixated upon grades for university applications, but the process by which universities select candidates is much more complicated than just grades. They really do want to know about you as a person and whether you have the skills and the potential to do well on a course. So again, the personal statement is part about focusing on you and your learning and not just the grades. In fact, many UK universities give contextual grades. So they vary the grade requirements depending on your educational background. A lot of grade boundaries are changed, so offers can go down on the basis of a personal statement. So it's a really important thing to do, regardless of whether you're going to the UK or not. And in fact, as you're writing your personal statement, you might realize that actually the course you're applying for might not be the course that you really want. So let's just start from the beginning and think about what a personal statement actually is. So a personal statement supports your application to study at a university or college. And it's a chance for you to explain why you'd like to study a particular course or a subject, and to demonstrate what skills and experiences you possess that show your passion for your chosen field. Now, clearly, this is much easier if you actually want to study what you're applying for. And sometimes students will have predicted grades that are way above the grade requirement for the course that they're applying for, but they still don't get given an offer. And quite often the reason for that is because in their personal statement, they weren't able to convince the admissions tutor that they actually wanted to do the course. And that's true of almost every university. So I know that UBD, for example, if you want to go to their medicine course, of course you have to have good grades, but the interview is really, really important because they want to know that you actually do want to study what you're applying for. Because their biggest nightmare is students that drop out after a year or two because they've chosen the wrong course. And it's a really good idea to write a personal statement, as I said earlier, even if you don't actually need to use one. So what do you write about? Well, actually, you're just writing about yourself. You can't get someone else to write your personal statement for you. It needs to be a reflective process where you think about genuinely why it is that you want to do the course you're applying for. but also is to think about the skills that you have that will make you a good student to do that course. It might also identify things that maybe you need to work on, because you should have a growth mindset. So maybe if you're applying for a course that requires high levels of teamwork, for example, and actually you haven't done very much that demonstrates teamwork, well, it gives you the opportunity, if you start early enough, to gain that valuable experience that you will need. So basically, you're telling admissions staff why you're suitable to study at their university or college. And it's important to remember that you can only write one personal statement if you're applying to the UK. It's the same for each course you apply for, so you should avoid mentioning any universities or colleges by name. So the standard UK application, you're actually applying for 5 different courses, and the institution's reading your personal statement, you can't mention them specifically because it will upset the other ones. So avoid mentioning any universities or colleges by name. Now, my strong advice is that you apply for just one subject. So if you want to do business studies, just apply to do business studies. It's really difficult. If you've chosen subjects which are very different, like if you apply to do psychology and business and maths, it's going to be virtually impossible to produce a personal statement that explains why you want to study those 3 different subjects. Now, it's absolutely fine if you've chosen similar subjects. So if you've done business studies or maybe a marketing degree, yeah, absolutely, they're quite similar. So you can keep your personal statement valid to all of those. But my strong advice is to choose only one subject or 2 very closely related. And if you have chosen a variety of subjects, you can just write about common themes like problem solving or creativity. Now, some universities do allow you to put a separate personal statement in. So for example, Durham allows you to write a personal statement that goes directly to them, but those types of universities are quite rare. So I've got some ideas here to help you get started. And the key, as with most things in life, is research. So if you've got some courses you're thinking of applying to, go and have a look at their course descriptions, because quite often the course descriptions actually tell you what they're looking for. So you can identify the qualities, the skills and experience that it requires, and you can use these to help you decide what to write about. So they quite often have webinars that you can join, or they have virtual online days, and you can sort of figure out what they're actually looking for, and then you can make sure that your personal statement focuses on the things that they are looking for. You need to tell the reader why it is that you're actually applying. So including things like your ambitions is a really good starting point. So if, for example, you want to work as a lawyer, and perhaps you have an interest in humanitarian law or something like this, then state that, because that's a good reason why you might want to do it. So you could also talk about what interests you about the subject, and potentially the course provider, and higher education in general. So why is it that you actually want to go to higher education? And think about what makes you suitable. You could have had relevant experience. So a lot of the students from the UK that are doing their personal statements, they may have done work experience or things like that. But there's loads of things here in Brunei that you can do. There's loads of NGOs that you can volunteer for. There's loads of skills that you might have been able to demonstrate in your school career or outside of school. Any achievements that you've gained from education, any competitions that you've won, pretty much anything which demonstrates skills that they're looking for, you can include in your personal statement. It's really important to build up evidence. And this is true for interviews or anything else. It's very easy to make a claim. So when I read the first drafts of personal statements, a lot of people make very ambitious claims about how they have amazing leadership skills, amazing teamwork skills, amazing communication skills, but they provide no evidence for that. So if you haven't done so already, for every claim that you make, every quality that you claim to have, you need to try and find some kind of evidence for that, something that you've done, something concrete and something specific to back up the claim that you've made. So you could include any clubs or societies you belong to. So they could be sporting or creative or musical. So for example, if you're applying to study environmental science, it would be a really good idea to do some volunteer work for an organization such as Green Brunei. And then you can give real examples of things that you've done, which makes your application that bit much more believable. Now, globally, there are restrictions on our lives, as we know. So sometimes carrying this type of thing out in person is difficult, but universities and colleges do understand that, although actually within Brunei, we're very lucky because we've been able to carry on more or less as usual. So if you haven't had any of these experiences, don't worry about it. That's why we start this process nice and early, so that you're able to identify gaps in your profile, and you can begin to fill those gaps. So if you've developed skills through things like the Duke of Edinburgh Award, or the Scouts organization, or leadership roles at school, these are all really useful things to include. Now, another thing that universities are looking for is things that go beyond the curriculum. So there are lots of students that get very good A-levels or very good results at IB, and they're very good at working in class, they're very good sort of students in school, but that's not necessarily all that a university is looking for. They really want students that have gone beyond the curriculum, if at all possible. And this is especially true for the higher end universities. So a really good way of doing this for free is something called a MOOC. And you can just put MOOC into Google and you'll get a huge range of these things. Some of them you pay for, but most of them are absolutely free. And what they are is that universities around the world have these online courses which you can sign up for. They last from anything between a few days to a few weeks. And if you pay, you get a certificate for them. But they're a really good way of proving that you have a genuine academic interest in what you are studying. They're also quite good because it might be that you're applying to do law for whatever reason, but actually, once you do a course on law, it's not actually very interesting. It's not really what you wanted to do, because a lot of the things that we go on to study at university are things that aren't offered at school. So it gives you the opportunity to, experience firsthand the types of things that you'll be doing at university, and maybe they're fantastic and it's something that you really want to continue into the future. But equally, it might be something you think, you know what, that's not really me, because I made that same mistake. I wanted to apply to study archaeology because I thought it sounded really interesting. I imagined that I'd be, looking at ancient Egyptian tombs and finding treasure. But when I went to university, it wasn't like that at all. It was largely digging holes and looking at mud and things like that, which didn't interest me at all. So do your research, and I recommend doing a MOOC. Now, this is something, personal statements are something that people massively struggle with. So there's a huge number of things out there to help you. So I've included some links on here which you can use later on. All of these are taken from the UCAS website. So you've got one that looks at frequently asked questions. There's one that tells you where you can find pointers about writing your personal statement. And there's a couple of blogs which gives real life experiences of people that have been through the process that you're about to do, because it is very difficult. So let's drill right into what you actually do. So your personal statement needs to be unique. It's, as we said right at the beginning, it's all about you and you as a person and why you want to do that course. There is no definite format. There is no template that I can give you for you to follow. But it's something that develops over time, and it's something that you'll probably write several drafts of. But I'll give you a few guidelines for you to follow. But just remember that your personal statement is personal. The clue really is in the title. So the first thing is your kind of style of writing. So a lot of people try to write in a really clever way using words that they wouldn't normally use. And when you do that, it makes it sound odd. So you want to write in an enthusiastic in a concise and a natural style, nothing too complex. I mean, part of the skill of writing is to convey things in a simple way. So that's fantastic advice. Now, you want to try and stand out a little bit, because admissions tutors will read literally hundreds and hundreds of these. So you want yours to be a little bit different, but to be honest, just mentioning things that you've done in Brunei will make you stand out anyway. Be very careful with humor. Don't try and put jokes in, because there's a very good chance that they won't share your humor. Please do not start with a quote. It's amazing how many personal statements begin with a quote from Nelson Mandela or something. Please don't do that. The best way to actually start is, I want to study law because, simple as that. And actually starting it is one of the hardest things that you can do. So you want to structure your information to reflect the skills and qualities that universities and colleges value the most. And as I mentioned before, the course descriptors will help you. With the UK, they have a limit of the characters and lines. So it's 4,000 characters and 47 lines. Be aware that some word processors give different values. So you have to put it into the UCAS application before you can check that it has the correct number of characters and lines. And it's not something that you should do alone. So you should ask help from your teachers, HE advisors and family to check it over. You redraft it until you're happy with it, and obviously make sure that the spelling, the punctuation and grammar is correct. Now, it really is something that should develop over a couple of months, really. So your first draft will probably not be fantastic. Show it to someone that you trust, someone whose opinion you value, and then they'll give you some pointers. And don't be forced into changing it into things that you don't like, but you will need to redraft and think about the things that work well and the things perhaps that don't work quite as well. So we recommend that you write your personal statement first, and then you copy and paste it into your online application once you're happy with it. And obviously make sure you save it regularly. It's quite irritating if it deletes itself. Now, there are two documents here that I've attached that I think are a really good starting point. And the personal statement worksheet, I think, is the best. And I've done some screenshots that I can talk you through. So what it's got a series of boxes for you to think about. And actually, some of these are pretty difficult to answer. So it's not something that I imagine you'll sit down and write the whole thing from start to finish. It's something that will evolve over a week or two. But once you've filled in these boxes, I think that writing the personal statement will be much, much easier. And actually, your biggest problem will be cutting it down to the correct length rather than trying to find extra stuff to put in. So the first thing is to reflect on why you're actually applying for your chosen course. And there's a number of reasons why you might be doing it. For some people, they just have a fascination for that subject. So if you're applying for things like English literature, you might just have a love of reading and a love of characterization. You might have, a period of literature that you particularly love, and that's absolutely fine. Now, for others of us, there might be a vocational reason why we want to study something. So it might be that we want to work in engineering, we want to work in chemical engineering. So studying the course is something that you've done to progress your career. So if that's the case, then say that. That's absolutely fine. If you're applying for that chosen course because you're being forced into it, because you're being pressured into doing it, well, that's probably not a very good reason. So try and find a genuine reason why you want to study that. And then have a think about why the subject actually interests you. As I said earlier, the biggest fear that universities have is that people will find the course not very interesting and drop out after a year. So include evidence that you understand what's required to study the course. So for example, if it's psychology courses, show that you know how scientific the subject is, because a lot of people apply for things, and law is the classic one, and they don't really know what law is. I mean, law requires you to do a huge amount of reading. It needs you to have attention to detail, the ability to formulate arguments. And so in your personal statement, you need to reflect that you really do understand what the subject does. So for psychology, a very important part of psychology is actually statistical analysis. Maths is quite important. Neurological anatomy is quite important. So you need to show that you've actually understood what's required and why you'd be good at that. Some courses are far more hands-on than others. Some are far more lecture-based. So you need to reflect that so you know what it is that you want to apply for. The next thing you need to do is, so you've already said, why you want to do it, but why are you suitable for that course? Do you have these skills and experience that will help you to succeed? Again, do your research, have a look at the types of modules that the different university courses have. So if you want to do economics, for example, maths is hugely useful. You need to be able to demonstrate high levels of numeracy, for example. So if your subjects do not include maths, which is possible, then you can give examples of where you've used maths in your other courses. So for example, in coursework that you've done or science that you've done. So you need to double check that you make sure you're suitable for that course. And it might be that you find out that the subjects you've chosen aren't actually that relevant. So some courses, it's very useful to have some form of work experience. So if you're applying to do law, it's not a bad idea to visit a law court or try and get an internship with a legal firm. If you want to apply for medicine, it's a very good idea to visit hospitals. You can do rotations at repass, for example. And again, it's not just listing the experiences you've had. The key thing is, why are they useful? So you can talk about how you went to repass and the area that you found particularly interesting was cardiology, for example. It really shows that you're on the right course. So do your current or previous studies relate to the course you've chosen? If so, how? So if, for example, you are wanting to do, I don't know, business studies or something, it would make sense that the A levels that you've chosen or the IB subjects that you've chosen do actually relate to the course that you are studying. And again, it might turn out that you do not have the correct subjects to do a course. So for example, if you want to do architecture, it's very useful to have studied art because you have to put your portfolio together. So think about how your previous studies are relevant to the course. So things that you have enjoyed but you'd like to study in a little bit more detail. Then there's a section how you've taken part in any other activities that demonstrate your interest in the course. Again, this could be scuba diving, it could be a beach cleanup. There's loads and loads of things which we all do, and sometimes we don't realize how relevant they are and how they demonstrate your interest in what you want to study. Universities also like to know the skills that you have that will help you in the course or generally with life at university, such as accredited or non-accredited achievements. So there's a link there with some examples of things that you can do, but for example, if you've entered a hackathon or if you've joined a maths competition, all those types of things they really like and you can talk about. Think of other things you're proud of. So maybe you've held a leadership position at school. Maybe you've been a prefect. Maybe you've captained the football team. Maybe you've played netball. Maybe there's a huge range of things. So they want to know about that as well. A large part of the university experience is the extracurricular things. So there's loads of societies at university to do with the arts or sports or whatever. So if you have hobbies, interests, and things that you like doing, you like playing music or you like singing or knitting or whatever it is, talk about them. If you can, link them to the course, but you don't necessarily have to. Work experience. This is quite a tricky one here in Brunei because a lot of people don't actually have a lot of work experience, but you can talk about voluntary work. That's absolutely fast. You can volunteer in a school or for one of the NGOs that I mentioned, but if you have work experience, that's great and valid. Now, international students, there are a few extra things you might want to think about. So it's worth putting a little bit of why you actually want to study in the UK and why you think you can successfully complete a course that is taught in English. In fact, some universities have quite strict English language requirements, which you need to make sure and that you have met. There could be any number of reasons why you want to study in the UK, and it's not a terrible idea to mention what those are. And finally, as I said earlier, it's fine just to do a course because you find it fascinating. That's a good reason in itself. But what are your future plans? What do you want to do with it? Do you want to continue at university and go into academia, or do you want to pursue a certain career path? That would make sense to put in because it shows that you're willing to put the effort in to get to an end goal. Then we've got some do's and don'ts. So do use your best English and don't let spelling or grammatical errors spoil your statement. And it's quite easy to just forget something, so make sure that that's absolutely fine. Do show that you know your strengths and can outline your ideas clearly. Use words you know will be understood by the person reading your statement. Do be enthusiastic. If you show an interest in your course, it may help you to get a place. Do expect to produce several drafts of your personal statement before being totally happy with it, and do ask people you trust for their feedback. However, do not exaggerate. Do not claim to have read books that you haven't, because there's a good chance you may actually be called for interview. So this year, because of Zoom meetings and things, it's much cheaper and easier for universities to interview. So it might be that you've told things which are not particularly true, and as soon as you've got an interview, they're going to find those out. Don't rely on spell checker. Sometimes it has the American setting, so make sure you proofread it as many times as you can. And very importantly, do not leave this to the last minute. I'm hoping that what you're picking up from this presentation is that this actually takes you quite a long time. You need to do a lot of research. You need to ask a lot of people's opinions. You've got to be able to maybe find those experiences that you don't have, if you haven't got them, so it'll give you time to fill those skills gaps that maybe you don't have. So please don't leave it to the last minute. It's something you should start doing as soon as is possible. As an international student, I mentioned earlier, there are a few extra things you should mention. So why you want to study in the UK, your English language skills, and any English courses or tests that you've taken, and why you want to be an international student rather than study in your own country. It's really important to get this right, because the personal statement is a really important part of the admissions process, and they really do, read carefully what you've written. If you do a good job, the grade requirement could go down, and if you don't do a good job, there's a possibility that they won't offer you a place because they're not convinced that you really are genuinely interested in the course that you have applied for. But actually, the ability to write about yourself in the sort of format of a personal statement is massively useful in life in general. When you apply for jobs, you will be asked to write an application letter, and you need to explain, why you've applied for this job, what your skills are, your relevant experiences. So, regardless of where you want to apply for, I strongly recommend that you go through this process. Now, final point is there might have been some form of personal circumstance that has affected your academic performance. There might have been a family bereavement, and there might be some mental health condition or whatever it is. You can mention, there's a section in the UCAS application that you can mention those things, and your reference will mention them. If your personal circumstances affected your qualification choices, so maybe you've gone to a school that doesn't offer the courses that you wanted to do. So maybe you're desperate to do a thing in a course in accounting, but your school doesn't teach accounting. Well, mention that, because they might think it's odd why you haven't studied various courses. And if you have suffered from financial hardship from your studies, you can let the university know about that as well. So I hope that has helped a little bit. It is a very difficult area, but I hope that has helped you a little bit. And if any of you have any questions, I'd be very happy to try and answer them for you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Alex, for the very insightful presentation. So here we have two questions. One question is from Kaya Hyron. So she asked, how long should a personal statement be, and can she write it longer than one page? For example, if the personal statement is like The question is like, write a personal statement about yourself, something like
Okay,
that.
well, it very much depends on where you're applying for. So if you're applying for the UK, then they're very strict on how much you can write. So you're limited to 4,000 characters and 47 lines. But for other places, so for example, the US or Canada, they might be a bit more flexible, but they will normally give you some form of guidance as to how long they expect it to be. So I can't give you a direct answer to that question. It very much depends on where you're applying to.
Okay. All right. So the next question, does the personal statement has to be formal or informal?
It definitely needs to be formal. So as I said, you can't put jokes in, you mustn't use language that's too casual. So it needs to be formal, but it shouldn't be too formal. You need to come across as being quite likable. I think the tone would be the same tone that you would use speaking to a teacher, for example. I recommend using the same language that you would use in an essay. So you don't need to be, too praising of the academic that's reading it. It's just a sort of conversational, easy, relaxed style. But if anything, more formal than informal. If you're not quite sure, if you go onto the UCAS website, you can see loads of examples of personal statements. And once you've read a few, you can get a real good idea of the style of writing that works best.
Okay. But can the personal statement be written in bullet points?
No, absolutely not. It needs to be written in clear paragraphs.
All right.
So if you're stuck as to how to structure it, it's probably sensible to have it into 3 different sections. So the first paragraph would be on reasons why you wish to pursue that course. And then you could have a separate paragraph on the skills that you have that are relevant to it. Maybe another paragraph on the experiences that you've had that are relevant to it. And then a final summary paragraph, concluding paragraph at the end. But it should definitely be written in full sentences and in clear paragraphs.
So no bullet points at all.
No bullet points.
All right.
For
Okay.
the UK, anyway.
Yeah. So another question, do personal statements have to be exciting or interesting? Because many students have normal, boring lives.
Not too exciting. I mean, they shouldn't come across as boring, because the great thing if you're a university lecturer is you get to choose the people that you teach. So what you're really looking for is people that are interested in the subject. They don't really care too much how exciting you are as a person. So they need to be enthusiastic. You don't want to come across as somebody who's not interested in anything. So you should focus on the things that you do and that you enjoy. And they also don't really want people that are just all about studying. So I think you want to portray yourself as an all-round individual and talk about the things that you enjoy doing. And we all have things that we enjoy doing. It could be cooking or walking or sports or anything. That's fine. So try and be interesting, but don't try and be too interesting because you could come across as a bit weird. You don't want to come across as weird.
Yeah. Basically, don't exaggerate everything. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And also you'll get caught out. If you claim to have represented Brunei for football and you haven't, they'll find that out very quickly.
Okay. That's yeah. So another question, do personal statement have sorry for that. So what is the great way to ensure that the personal statement isn't cliche?
That's an interesting question. I think things like not including quotes is a good way. And also it's just speaking in the way that you would, so writing in the way that you would speak. And just not making, it's quite hard to answer that question. You just don't make cliched statements, and definitely don't use quotes. Don't try and use other people's ideas. And if you are honest in what you're saying, then it'll be quite hard to be cliched.
Yeah. All right. One question for Alin Ho. So basically, in including clubs or societies, is it okay to elaborate the personal qualities learning from them?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, you must. One of the worst things you can do is just put a list of the things that you've done without explaining why they're relevant to what you've applied for. So, for example, if you just say that you did some volunteering work for the beach bunch, or you were in a scouting organization, and you don't elaborate on it, then the university doesn't really know why that's relevant. So it might be for a beach cleanup, for example, that it highlighted the seriousness of plastic pollution, or it might be that you used a technique to graph the different types of plastic that you found, or if you've done some volunteer work, it demonstrated your interpersonal skills and you discovered that you had a talent for working with young people, or whatever it is. So it's really important to elaborate on why, what you learned from doing something and why it demonstrates a skill. So yes, do elaborate. But obviously you have a limit to how much you can write. So it's being concise, but definitely elaborating on why you're mentioning things that you've done. They should be relevant to the course you're applying for.
Okay. One last question. Is there any words that to avoid in a personal statement?
Obviously, swear words is a bad idea to
Yes.
do. I think you want, for the UK, you want to make sure that you're not mentioning anything overtly political or religious. It needs to be focused on the subject, and don't use conversational, like for example, or try and avoid words like nice. Try and find sort of more interesting adjectives to use. So you wouldn't say that reading that book was quite interesting or quite nice.
Oh,
But there's no specific words other than swear words that I would avoid.
okay. All right. So do you have anything to add more?
Not really, but what I would say is that it's just a really important thing to do. And I think sometimes people don't realize how important a good personal statement is. And in the 15 years that I've been doing this, there have been quite a few students that, for whatever reason, exams haven't worked out for them, the grades they got weren't as good as they perhaps could have achieved. And it's that personal statement that has made the difference. So in the UK, if you don't get the grades that universities require, you go into something called clearing, which is where universities that still have vacancies on their course, they go through your application. So I've known lots and lots of students who their grades didn't fit the requirements, but because their personal statement was good, they still secured places. So my final takeaway thing is to start the process early, because you will have to do research, you will have to do a number of drafts, and do take it seriously. It really is not something that you can do at the last minute. And I would encourage you to write a personal statement, even if you don't need one, because if you're finding it really difficult to think of why you're wanting to apply for a course, and you're finding it really difficult to write that personal statement, there's a good chance that actually you're applying for the wrong course, and applying for the wrong course can be a very expensive and a very you lose a lot of time as well. So I applied for the wrong course because I didn't think about it too much. So I think everyone should write a personal statement if they can.
Yep, I agree with that. Okay, so we only have 1 minute left. So maybe we can just end our session for this afternoon. Thank you, panel. Thank you so much for the
It's a
insightful
pleasure.
question. It's very good. Thank you all for joining webinar session of the Higher Education Expo 2021. The next session will be at 3 p.m. Thank you so much, and assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.